a few familiar faces, also some people I haven't met before, which is great. So I'll give a quick introduction to what the project's all about. Apologies to those that have, like Stuart, that have heard it a few times. So I'll try and be quick. Yeah, essentially, Uttlesford District Council have been awarded funding from the government to make a design code, which is a piece of planning documentation which aims to control the kind of quality and style, etc., of new development coming forward in the district. One of the key aims is to work with local people as closely as we can, from the early stages to help that document reflect local people's aims, wants, needs, etc. So is it worth doing a quick round of introductions, starting with the project team, and then just quickly everybody else who's on the call. So I'm Jack Bennett. I'm Uttlesford District Council's Principal Urban Design Officer. I'll pass over to Sarah Tuzo.
Thanks, Jack. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Sarah Tuzo from LDA Design, and I'm an architect and master planner, and we're also providing landscape services, and we're the sort of appointed project leads on as part of the project team by Uttlesford, and we're supported by a range of other consultants, including engagement and heritage, who are on the call today. So I will pass over to Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Cargill-Thompson, and I'm from Soundings. We're the engagement consultants on the project. So shall I hand over to Jenny?
Hello, hi, I am Jenny Mason. I'm from a company called JB Heritage Consulting, and we are providing the heritage inputs into the design code throughout the process. Yeah, okay.
And I suppose I could go across my screen, and just, if people are okay to quickly say who you are. Heather Gurdon.
Muted.
Hear me now, folks?
Got you.
Yeah. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Heather Gurdon. I'm the Strategic Designing Out Crime Officer for Essex Police.
Great to have you. Nice to meet you. Frank Woods, good to see you again.
Yeah, hi, Frank Woods. I was a member of the previous Community Stakeholder Forum, representing the heritage aspect of design.
Great, thank you. Vikra, is that your name?
No, it's Vic Ranger. Hello, I'm a past district councillor. I've only just got on video because I've been finishing my dinner. We're running a bit late. Yeah, I'm working design on developments across the district and neighbouring districts, hence my interest in it.
Great, thank you. Diana Frost.
Hi, I'm Diana Frost from Hempstead Parish Council, just an interested party in, I used to build stores for Marks and Spencer many years ago, so got involved with planning in those days, and interested to see that, yes, we do end up with our neighbourhood looking as we would wish it to.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Kevin.
Hello, I'm Kevin French. I'm a councillor at Little Dunmow. Came along to Saffron Walden, enjoyed the work we did there, so interested in continuing.
Great, thank you. Hi, Anne. You might be on mute.
Am I mute? Is that me?
Oh no, you're there. Hi.
Oh, hi. Yes, my name's Anne Orange. I am a teacher, used to teach in Saffron Walden, now teach in Cambridge. So I am a local resident. I live in a village just outside Saffron Walden, but I can really consider that my main town. I'm just interested resident, and want to participate as much as I can. Thank you.
Good to have you. Thank you. Stuart.
Yeah, Stuart Walker. I was a previous member of the Community Stakeholder Forum, particularly interested in cycling and walking, and local resident in Broxton for nearly 30 years.
Great, thank you. Jane? So I've got just Jane, and then there's Jane Farrington, but it's just Jane at the moment. Sorry.
Was it me?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Hi.
So I'm Jane Sharp, and I'm an interested party living in Saffron Walden. Do an awful lot of walking around with the dogs, so I know the area really well, all the footpaths and all the landscapes. So really interested in kind of protecting that and making sure that any development kind of just blends in and you know, supports the environment really.
Great, thank you. Jane Farrington.
Hi, my husband and I were residents of Leaden Roding, and we're just interested in knowing what's going on in the area really. Like to get a bit more involved than we have been in the past really.
Great, hi. David Birkbeck, hi, good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I am a resident. I've lived here since the mid-80s, but I also run a social enterprise from Wendell-Zambo, which is called Design for Home. So you can guess what that's about. And I was one of two people that wrote Building for Life, which is now Building for a Healthy Life, paid for by the NHS. And it is effectively the nearest thing we have to a national design code that's widely used. It's used by 54% of all local planning authorities. The whole operation is run from the old forge on the Wendell-Zambo, or the Audeon Business Park, just next to the station.
Great, good to have you. Baldeep, hi. Do you want to do a quick intro? Ah, okay. No worries. Baldeep's one of the consultants. Inga.
Hi, I'm Inga O'Mara. I'm a local resident. I've lived here for over 40 years. And yes, I was just really interested to know what was going on. So I feel like a bit of an observer, really. But some years ago, before I retired, I used to work with Cambridgeshire Health Authority. Did a lot of work in South Cambs with planning, and Camborne when it started, and North Stowe when it started. So I was quite involved with mostly design for health, actually. So I'm interested, and obviously want the best for Saffron Walden.
Fantastic, thank you. Valdis.
Hi, I'm Valdis from the Flitchway Action Group, which seeks to reconnect the Flitchway around Great Dunmow. I actually live in Ware, but I am involved with the FWAG, the Flitchway Action Group. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Emma.
Hello, good afternoon, evening actually. Sorry, my name's Emma Potter and I work alongside Heather, and we were hoping to make sure that all our future designs are safe and accessible for everyone without it being too obtrusive for everyone. So yeah, welcome and thank you for letting us listen in.
Great, good to have you. Okay, so at this point, am I okay to hand over to, is it Sarah now?
Yeah, it's going to be me. I'm just going to share screen if everyone just bears with me momentarily while I find the correct window. Right, hopefully that's appeared, and I hopefully I'm showing the right window. Is that the presentation come up, Jack, if you just confirm?
Yeah, maybe if you do full screen.
I will try and go full screen. So everyone will disappear from what I can see. So just if you've got, please, Jack, if everyone puts their hand up or asks a question you want me to stop, please just interrupt me. Yeah. Shout rather than hands up, I won't see. So okay. Yeah, I will get started. Thanks everyone for coming this evening. And just as a brief overview of what we'll be talking through this evening, we've obviously done the first point, which is the welcome and introductions. I'll be taking you through a bit of background about what we've been doing on the design code so far, what we're working on at the moment, the overall process.
Sorry, Sarah, I can't see it anymore. Is it just me?
It does look like it's gone.
We can't see it either, no. No, yes, can now. Yeah.
Right, is it still there now that I've gone full screen, or is that gone?
No,
okay, I think we're going to have to stick, I'm afraid, with it being regular size
okay.
screen.
Or I can share, Sarah, if you like.
Yeah, if you give it a go, that'd be great.
Is it loading up? Oh, you're on mute, Jessica. Is it loading up, Jessica?
Yeah, I think she's frozen.
You might be frozen, Jessica. You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah.
While Jessica gets the presentation loaded up, I'll continue to talk through what the agenda is, as we don't need to be able to see the slide to talk through that. So we talked through the process so far and where we're at in the overall programme. And then the session this evening will be split into two parts. So the first part is going to give an overview of some of the topics that we'll be including in the design code, how that relates to national and local policy, and also how we've looked at using area types, which is an approach set out in the national model design code, in order to provide coding which relates to different areas of the district. So we'll be discussing those and open that up for discussion as well. And then there'll be a second part which looks at what might be appropriate, what we might include within those areas, and how people would like to see or might have views on differences between these area types that we've defined, and also what might be coded for district-wide. We'll then give an overview of what's next and what the next points of engagement might be, and then again any other points that people would like to pick up or discuss. So Jessica, if you're able to go on, or Baldeep, if you're sharing, go onto the timeline, please. Perfect. So just as Jack's given a bit of background, obviously some of you we've met before, but we started the process in late summer, which is when we were appointed, and at this stage we set up an initial website. We undertook some walkabouts of some of the local areas, so met some of the community on those, understanding what people like and dislike about their local area. In October, we had some public workshops, which included a coach tour to some recent developments within the district, and a series of public workshops across primarily sort of visioning and scoping of the design code and what people see as being distinctive within areas of Uttlesford. So we're obviously in November, and at the moment we're going to be looking and discussing today at some of Uttlesford's places, how we might develop character areas and area types, and how we might code for the distinctive differences across the district. And there'll be a feedback, and this will be on the website as well to get wider public feedback. And this isn't the final opportunity to engage. We'll be progressing, building on what we hear this evening, the development aspirations and what's included in the code, with further consultation on some of the more details and what you might be seeing in the actual code itself, how we've taken that forward in January, February time to get a sort of draft of the design code between March and May. And this relates to, obviously, as Jack mentioned, the project funding which has come from the LUC, the Department for Levelling and Housing Up Communities. So we will submit our findings to them in May, and this will include a draft where we're at with the design code. And there may be some ongoing work and sort of engagement with officers as well to finalise that before it goes again out to consultation on the draft code. That will be reviewed and in due course, hopefully adopted and tested and updated as needed. And this may then follow on into future design codes after that process. So in addition to the consultation which we've set out on this board, in the background we've been also engaging with officers. We have transport consultants and ecologists, landscape. So we've had a series of workshops internally, including with development management officers, to understand some of the challenges of development in the district historically, and getting that sort of planning policy input into how we take the design code forward, as well as workshops and engagement with the wider Pathfinder process as part of the funding. If we just go on to the next slide, please, Jessica. I'll just hand over to Jessica now to just give a bit of an overview of some of the engagement that we've had and the sort of what we've been hearing so far in that process.
Oh, okay. So I think quite a few people here were at some of the recent engagement events in October and over the summer. So thank you again for coming. Your input and comments and insight has been really valuable and is helping to shape these design codes. So as you'll know, we did some walkabouts around Saffron Walden, Stanton Mount Fitchett and Great Dunmow in the summer, and then in October we were doing some pop-up events in there's a picture there of us in Thaxted Market, Saffron Walden Market, coach tour, which a few of you were kind enough to accompany us on in October, and the October's workshop. Some of the sort of, I suppose, headlines that are coming out of the things that you clearly value are sustainable design, greenery, green space, but greenery generally, and water, improvements to roads and routes and connections, and that includes a number of people who are very keen for sort of safe cycling and safe walking routes. There's obviously a lot of concern that there's existing pressure on facilities, services, infrastructure, etc., and that sort of any sort of new expansion to the population would might put more pressure on that. So obviously uses are something that we're considering as well within the design code. Variety, so variety of uses, variety of buildings, variety of heights is such richness, particularly in the villages, towns and villages in Uttlesford. That's something that's very important to people. Quality of buildings, so buildings that are well built with good materials and good construction and are going to last the hundreds of years that Uttlesford buildings have lasted and not going to fall down in, have bits drop off them in 10 years time. Places to play in young people, places for teenagers, building things that work with the landscape rather than against it, so that maybe nestled into it rather than sitting right on top of it and sort of ruining the landscape and the view. And then also the acknowledgement that there's a lot of differences across the district, which is something that will play a large part in our discussion this evening.
Great, thank you. So obviously, so we are producing a design code which covers the entire district. For those who haven't been in some of the earlier sessions, this is doesn't relate to the allocations within the future local plan. Obviously, that's in a separate process being undertaken. This seeks to set higher design standards and principles for development across the entire district, including, as Jessica mentioned, response to the landscape and the nuances of the district. We also understand and appreciate that not everywhere in the district is the same. There's a lot of different characters across the rural area, and so we are looking at specific coding relating to settlement areas and the type of settlement, and whether the development is within or adjacent to these settlement types. We're also looking at developing principles around the landscape character areas or area that any development might lie within, to ensure that these respond appropriately to whether it's the nuances of topography or the materiality within those landscape character areas, which have influenced how places have evolved historically, and make sure that new development responds and fits in with those characteristics. So in addition to the design coding that sits within this document, there'll be elements of that we covered by existing national and local policy. There are obviously a number of village design statements, neighbourhood plans, and similar documents which we produce, and we're not seeking to replace those, but make reference to those and also set out process that should be followed by developers and as they and applicants as they come forward with proposals, so ensuring that people respond to those documents, and elements such as the Essex Design Guide, highways manuals, manual for streets, and similar guidance, but really embedding what those documents mean in Uttlesford. So what are the sort of local nuances of streets that take the design requirements of Essex highways, but make those relate to Uttlesford and the different places within Uttlesford. Where would they be appropriate, and how would they like to be seen to come forward in those areas? Obviously, with the current adopted local plan being from 2005, there's quite a lot has changed in that time, and so we will be responding to the National Design Guide and the policies set out in the National Planning Policy Framework through our work. So if we just move on to the next slide, the National Design Guide sets out 10 key themes, and these are set out within say national policy, and we'll be using these key themes and hooks into policy to set out clear expectations of how the expectations of Uttlesford and what people would like to see in Uttlesford, and that gives them more weight in planning until the new local plan comes forward. So at the district-wide level, so across the whole district, broadly all of the topics of the design guide will be referenced. So context will set out, some of this may relate to process of how the context needs to be understood in the development process, movement and how connectivity needs to be set out. And some of these will be entirely district-wide, so principles around resources, for example, and integration of refuse and those sorts of principles may be all district-wide. Some of these may also have layers that are specific to certain areas of Uttlesford to ensure that they're responsive to whether it's the built form or principles of a certain area in Uttlesford. And if we just move on to the next slide, please. So with this, and hopefully this is big enough for everyone to see, that actual place names might be trickier to see. But with this in mind, we've looked at how we may group areas together in terms of a series of what we've called area types, and this looks at the towns being one grouping, where the sort of main infrastructure and sort of town centres are, where people go for more of their sort of shopping needs locally, and so how we may respond specific principles, such as whether it's different parking standards within the town centres versus villages, for example. The next level or group that we've looked at is the larger villages, so areas that might have schools and facilities, certain populations. Some of those are related to existing train and infrastructure, and we've broadly built upon the local plan evidence base and settlement hierarchy to help understand these areas. So then the sort of smaller villages will have distinct separate different principles as well, and we won't go through them name by name, but if people have specific questions about where their sort of village is located within these area types, we can go through those. And we obviously appreciate that within, it's obviously a very rural district, there are smaller hamlets, farmsteads and sort of groups of houses that sit within what here we've called the open countryside. They won't be left out of the documents, but there will be principles for those more sensitive sort of smaller groupings within the countryside as well. Just to pick up very briefly on Stansted Airport. Stansted Airport itself is obviously controlled by sort of national policies as well, so that that won't be a focus of the design code, but again, it's not that we're leaving that out of the considerations. We may be including coding if appropriate around landscaping, for example, within the sort of flight path of Stansted Airport, to ensure that there's still good positive design that comes forward in those areas. And we'll also be coding for employment as well, which may relate to some of these settlements. There may be areas outside of the settlement, but that will be picked up at some of the district-wide points as well for employment sites. If we just go on to the next slide, please. So some of the things that we're considering including within these area types, and this is part of the discussion this evening, to hear what as a community you might like to see different between these different area types, are the type and mix of uses. So potential for if development comes forward in the larger villages, what uses should be encouraged, what, you know, in terms of distances, walkability of those communities, the types of houses, obviously the housing mix is governed at sort of local policy level, but are there types of houses that might be encouraged to be in the villages versus the town centres? Gardens and balconies, where might it be more appropriate to put to have reduced garden sizes versus having different characters? Again, boundary treatment, so obviously nuances of the historic boundaries within the settlements, but ensuring that sort of setbacks from the road respond to the character of those areas. Again, they may be different within town centres versus the edges of towns and within the villages. There may be elements of detailing and materiality that might be considered different within either the area types or landscape character areas that could be included. Types of open spaces as well. These may be more appropriate in different area types. I'd like to hear about that. And different types of streets as well, given the scale of some of these sort of variety of settlements. Density and the sort of how tight knit and building heights of development in these areas as well, and how the buildings might relate to one another in those areas. Just go on to the next slide, please. So this just sort of looks, well, some of that detail that I've set out already is how we've sort of set out these themes. So the towns, which provide those sort of vital facilities and sort of health services for the community, the larger villages, smaller villages, and then obviously the open countryside we've gone through. And one of the things in the discussion I'd like to hear from you is what aspects of coding or design policy you would like to see differentiated by different areas within the district. And of course, if you agree with how we've defined these area types as well, we would welcome comments on that. If you just go on to the next slide. So we've also looked at the landscape character of the district, and this broadly builds on evidence base and background of the sort of history and landscape of the district. So broadly, there are three broad landscape character areas. There are obviously nuances between these. The chalk uplands, which is the lighter green, the farmland plateau, which is the sort of teal green, and then the river valleys, which is the blue. And there's obviously particularly sorts of topography and materiality, differences of species and planting within these areas, and how new development should ensure it responds to those ecology and connectivity as well, to make sure that what's placed in these areas is appropriate. Just go on to the next slide. So some of the things that landscape character areas may cover might be the relationship of the site to its setting, how the edges respond to the landscape to make sure they integrate sensitively, the materials, and sort of through some of the analysis, these sort of vary by the landscape character rather than necessarily by the settlements. The colour tones and what might be appropriate to sort of make sure things fit well and sit within the landscape, textures, the differences, particularly for the river valleys, response to flood risk, and how it provides sustainable drainage given the different soil conditions between the landscape character areas. So providing guidance and principles on what needs to be done if you're in one area versus another area. And then if we just, the last slide, the last one on this, actually no, sorry, one more before the last one. This just gives a bit of a glimpse into the sorry about, yeah, this one, thank you. Some of the differences of these. So the river valleys obviously having V and U-shaped landforms and have tributaries. There are obviously some flat and undulating areas within the valley floors, and in areas these are wooded as well. So making sure we are capturing those within the design code. The sort of rolling forms of the chalk upland landscapes, and there are again some blocks of woodlands and copses within these areas, and this area is in particular typical of the smaller linear villages and hamlets along greens. So that's where we're seeking to understand how maybe the open spaces might be different in these different landscape areas. and then the farmland plateau landscapes, which is sort of broadly the larger of the landscape characters, which are then incised by the river valley landscapes, and are predominantly sort of enclosed arable fields, but in particular, given that open character, there's a lot of long distance views to churches and other elements, and that's something that we'll look at integrating within the code as well, to ensure those responses to the heritage assets are dealt with. And so similar to the previous question, at this stage we'll be discussing what might be different across those landscape character areas, getting your views as obviously local people on what you would like to see differentiated in the different areas of the district. And I think now the final plan, if we could skip to the next slide. This just shows how those all come together, the layering of those elements. So for example, if a development was coming forward in Newport, for example, it would respond to the principles required for obviously district-wide, or district-wide principles for larger villages, and then the landscape character areas that sits within. So a site may sit across more than one area, and it would need to show response to all of those principles to ensure it's capturing the key principles of that area. So I think before we move on to the second part, we'll sort of open up for questions or thoughts around what might be we might need to consider district-wide versus the area types. Obviously, get views on. We can maybe go through each of the area types to get views on how those might differ across topics. But we can open up to. I've seen there's been a few things in the chat as well, so I'll have a quick look through those while. If anyone's got any immediate things to ask, then please raise your hands, or Kevin.
Yes, I've just got slight concerns about boundaries between some small villages and the larger developments. I think it will need to be treated very sympathetically and sensitively, because the larger developments will attract more development, and a lot of time there's no space for it. It's my example is Little Dunmow. We're right next to Flitch Green. There's no more room in Flitch Green, so any development is going to head towards our village.
Yeah, so one of the things that we will be looking at is obviously the edges of developments and how they should respond to surrounding settlements. Obviously, as we've just discussed previously, the local plan will look at allocating development sites. However, one of the things that while the local plan hasn't yet set a spatial strategy as that progresses, is ensuring that we set principles about how new development relates to existing settlements, and the landscaping as well, to ensure that sort of the best sort of design principles are set out. One thing just before I go to David as well, just to add on the area types, is that obviously these don't include allocated sites at present, and in future, as the local plan comes forward, there may be larger developments proposed, sort of new communities, and the design code will be sort of mindful of this and set broader high-level principles about some of the process and the sort of musts of any new communities that may come forward in the future. So that's again something that we'll be looking for views on, how the sort of process and particular elements of new developments that would come forward in what would be the open countryside or adjacent to some of those settlements as well. David, to come in.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that it might be an idea to return to the Essex Design Guide, because I think it was 74 when it was first created. It was produced by people that lived and worked in the area, and I think the majority were employed by Essex County Council at the time. But they knew Thaxted and they knew Saffron Walden, and they used examples of it to demonstrate what the whole of Essex should look like. But what they were really careful of was that they didn't use photographs. They used things like sections and drawings to demonstrate the difference between standardized anywhere type layouts with standardized highways treatments, and the kind of qualities that people love about these villages and towns in the area here. So, you know, they would show that essentially it was a distance between the building lines in some of the streets in Saffron Walden of, say, something like 6, 7 or 8 meters. Whereas if you went to anywhere in the rest of Essex that had been built post 1960, it was always about 25 meters. And that was what gave the, you know, the indoor room feeling when you're outdoors, that you're in an enclosed space, that you were in somewhere intimate, that you were with other people that you could talk to on the street. I don't think you can deliver any of that using photographs. I think you have to use sections, and I think you have to use drawings. And I don't have a way for producing all that stuff or whatever, but, you know, you're working in the depths of winter. You're going to try and produce a design code by May of next year. Many of these streets are going to look quite bleak and at their worst over the next 3 or 4 months. So it might almost be a reason to go down that route anyway. But I'm very nervous about showing, say, a street like Henham Village with its thatched roofs and its wattle and daub walls, and demonstrating that as the quality that we're aspiring for with this code, because there's about 3 thatchers left in the entire planning authority, and there's about 3 people who know how to do wattle and daub. But what you're really saying is what we like is the section of the street. We like the green space in front of it. We like the, you know, the way that the tree is located about here or about there. And I really think that's what you've got to start to produce in your code. So I saw those lovely pictures. I mean, it's some great, and you clearly are under the skin of the place.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to translate that into the designs that come in from the house builders, which build 85% of everything in the area, by asking them to replicate Henham High Street, because they can't do it. There's no one to do it for them either. But they could get the feeling of the place if you can get the section right.
Yeah, that's certainly something that we're looking at in understanding across these. Obviously, we've given some example images of the villages to help show, you know, some of the differences. But we are going to be looking at those streets, what the sort of sky to you know, building ratios are and things like that, in order to sort of see what those differences are in these places and how that might come forward in the design code. And we obviously are working with we have had some engagement with Essex Design Guide, and that will we're not seeking to replace or contradict what's already set out in that good guidance, as with the sort of neighbourhood plan documents and others, setting sort of some of it will obviously be focused on a process of what needs to be demonstrated by developers to show that they've responded to the guidance and documents along the way.
But the only way you can make developers do what you want them to do is to do a 2-dimensional drawing, a 2D drawing that says, you know, your house cannot be further back from the back of the pavement than this distance.
We will have the, sorry, were you finished? Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, we will have those sections. It's the National Model Design Code kind of stipulates that's one of the main things that they should have for those, exactly those reasons you've just set out, really. And because we will have to be obviously in compliance with Essex highways, we'll be taking those street types that are in the Essex Design Guide, but doing a bit of an Essex Design Guide plus kind of our interpretation, how to make those more walkable, more friendly to pedestrians, whilst being kind of acceptable to Essex highways. But yeah, really good point about the sections. Vikra, sorry, I've forgotten your name. I'm just going off what I can see on the screen. Apologies.
As a sorry, can I ask, as a lay person, what is meant by the term section, please?
I'll tell you what. Can you put up a drawing, Jack?
Good idea.
It
Yeah.
might be easiest to show one.
I'll put one up in Vikra. So I know you were trying to talk and you're on mute, but are you all right to come in a second?
Oh, sorry, on there I'm unmuted. Yeah, sorry, Vic, by the way. I don't know how the RA got. Just picking up on David's point on the villages, they are as beautiful as they are and as much appreciated as they are. That's one of the problems we have in designing a plan to increase the number of houses in the district. You can't replicate the villages with the narrow streets and the narrow roads and virtually no pavements, because that doesn't fit with current standards and what we need to provide for people. So the villages, I think, stand alone, and the smaller villages, they don't need a design code because they're not going to get the development, because they're not sustainable locations. It's a chicken and egg thing. Where do you put the development? You can only put it where it's sustainable, and the villages located away from the main settlements aren't sustainable, so they're not going to get the amount of development that would require a design code. You just follow naturally what's there, and there are protections already in place.
Thanks, Vic. Oh, sorry, go
on. So I wasn't sure if you're going to share the section. I think it's a very good point. That's something we're opening up the discussion to understand if people think it is appropriate to write specific coding for the villages and the larger villages versus, or whether if we can, I don't know, Baldeep, if you're able to just share the area, the plan that shows those area types again. So, the smaller villages are located in, and we've got the open countryside, which will cover principles of, setting out the highest quality design within the open countryside, essentially setting or guidance on sort of barn conversions, or some elements may come forward in future design guidance. But whether it is appropriate to set principles for the smaller villages, or if the district-wide covers those. I think it's still, we're not seeking to replicate the villages, and obviously things will need to meet those design standards, which are different, but it's looking at what types of streets or spaces, if development does come forward in those areas, even if it's smaller development sites potentially, obviously appreciating that the larger sites may come forward elsewhere, but it's seeking to get views on if this an approach that people agree with, if we categorized them correctly, and so there's something we're open to those views on.
I'm just going to share screen now, and we can have a look at a section. Okay, so is that coming up?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So you can see my cursor down here, and this. So this is technically called an axonometric, but it's basically a 3D view. And then this would be the sectional drawing of that. And you could go into more detail and start to put dimensions on and annotations and say what's going on here. And then, yeah, I mean, in terms of street types, that's what a typical one would look like with a bit more detail. You could also look at junctions. So this is an example of different types of junctions. For example, pedestrian footpaths that continue over at the junction to give priority, those kind of things. So yeah, as David said, we'd want to establish those principles first, and then kind of nail them down to a measurable drawing.
Thank you. That's been really helpful.
Okay, Sarah, did you want us to share one of the area types?
I think it's just worth bringing up the plan again, just so we can, if anyone's got any comments or questions around what's shown on that plan. Thank you. I think it's maybe worth just touching on some of the themes of things I mentioned earlier, and discussing if anyone's got any views on whether there might be, for example, a development in a development around one of the larger villages versus one around in or to the edge of one of the towns, whether they might have any views on, for example, car parking standards. Would it be appropriate? Obviously, there are countywide parking standards. However, would it be appropriate to guide how that might be accommodated within towns versus the villages, for example, encouraging more sustainable methods of transport, obviously appreciating the infrastructure challenges of the district, also whether it's appropriate to encourage lower parking standards, for example, where the development sites might be closer to train stations or in more accessible locations. That's something that we'd welcome views on, whether people have a view on the sort of differences of some of these sort of standards and requirements in one area of the district versus another. Frank, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a thought. I'm slightly uncomfortable about the concept of trying to drive behaviours by restricting a facility such as car parking, rather than providing the infrastructure in the first place. I understand why you're doing it, but I don't know how well it works. Isn't that one of the problems with the previous local plan that was dismissed? That there were these new settlements going to be built, and then eventually the rapid transit system would be put in to service them, which obviously no one was going to be using because they were all using their cars already. It's this thing about chicken and egg. Got to put in the infrastructure first, not afterwards.
Yeah, so on the well, the sort of obviously the mention of the new communities in the previous local plan, obviously those would be covered by any new larger scale developments would be covered by separate principles, and they wouldn't be able to come forward without the local plan and the infrastructure requirement put in place. And obviously in the meantime, obviously there's smaller development sites coming forward where they, you know, obviously getting through appeal and other things, and it's understanding views on whether putting design standards that encourage not necessarily less parking, but maybe less on-plot parking and some within shared parking areas, that in the future, if when infrastructure comes forward or there's a modal shift and people change behaviours, or using hovercrafts or something in the future, that can go from being on plot on someone's private land, 3-4 parking spaces, to having those where they're in a shared space becoming a park or provided for another community. So just understanding, like looking at some of the future as well of how some of these elements might be integrated perhaps differently within the town centres versus some of the smaller villages, and how those might have an impact on, you know, the character of those places. So in addition to providing sort of design principles, obviously some of which will be set out in the Essex Design Guide already around, you know, trees and landscaping of parking, setbacks from the street, etc., whether there's differences of how that might be accommodated within the more rural areas of the district, and then the sort of the towns and better connected areas. David, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I support the point of trying to look at ways of making the parking work off plot. You have a really good example I've been to with Jack next to Stansted Mount Fitchett railway station. It's a market sales scheme which has got about 30% affordable housing. The affordable housing never ever gets any money for the parking treatments. So they stuck all the parking for the affordable housing in a space that sits between two facing rows of houses in a sort of, you could call it a central square, you could call it a housing square, whatever you want to do. It really works, and it would be a model that, you know, you could probably roll out quite regularly across the area. And again, you know, it would just be one of those things that you just need to demonstrate with a section of how it would work in order to get the quality of the space.
Yeah, we went to on one of the walking tours to the scheme you mentioned.
Area or something, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Dairy View, is that what it's called, Jack?
There's Dairy Lane or Elms Farm. I think it's Dairy Lane is the actual name of the road. Yeah.
And there's another good example in Thaxted as well, where there's this sort of quite nicely landscaped, sort of more shared parking
The front
area.
court next to the garage, no?
Yeah, is it the old sweet factory?
Yeah,
David introduced me to that one. Yeah, it's very, very nice.
Complete with huge beds of rosemary, you know, in between the parking bays. Probably the only one literally in Britain. Very impressive.
there's such a good attention to detail, the Rosemary, I think.
But that is a clever way of dealing with car parking, and one definitely try and build into your code.
Absolutely.
So that someone's just put in that I can only see initials, but a point about how shared parking and fits with electric charge points. And I mean, this obviously something that needs to be, we have later on a couple of images of charging points, but these can be sensitively integrated into the landscaping and associated with those parking courts as well. So that's something that needs to be planned and integrated from the outset of developments, and one of the sort of more sort of resource focused sections of the design code that will look at ensuring that electric vehicle charging is provided, and always electric vehicle charging ready with the sort of cabling in place to allow for that. So it's an important point to make sure that those work, but there are good examples of how electric charging points are sensitively integrated into shared charging areas.
Yes, I'm sure it's possible, but I think the economics are going to be very difficult, because public charging is generally thought to be significantly more expensive at the moment than provision via a private network.
Apologies, I had to mute momentarily and I missed that question.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sorry.
So I was just saying that public charging points are okay. I mean, they're better than nothing, but they are generally thought to be a far more expensive way to charge a vehicle than a private connection through your own tariff to your own provider. So I would have thought it was very undesirable for to be planning for that as the default for the future if you don't have access to your own charging location by your house.
So they, in terms of the sort of parking area that's shared, they could be allocated spaces, so the charging is for that space, or it could be that that's part of the management and maintenance of the particular housing development. So I obviously appreciate electric charging points within, you know, supermarket car parks and similar is one sort of approach, but in terms of within a housing neighbourhood or development, it could be part of the sort of communal services that are provided through, whether it's a management company or community function or similar. So it'd be for those homes would use those spaces, and it would be could be dealt with in that way.
I'll take your word for that, but it's not a small thing like communal lighting. This is a substantial amount of energy consumption that will have to be carefully tariffed, and well, I think it almost should be the starting point of a design for the future.
Interesting, when you get to Poundbury, they actually have communal charging stations now in the street, and they are the ones that the local taxi drivers go to. And I talked to a taxi driver at Poundbury and said, why are you here and not charging from your home? And they said it's cheaper. So there must be a way of doing it. I just don't know any detail on it.
There's a question from Jane in the chat. Jane, do you want to unmute and ask your question, or do you want me to read it out?
We can read it out.
Yeah. Does planning law allow a local authority to object to designs of new homes? Is this a valid reason for refusing a planning application? Broadly speaking, in the past it's been difficult, but it's getting easier. The NPPF, which is the national planning document, has been strengthened in this regard, and this design code, the kind of reason why we're here is part of that. The idea, generally speaking, being that we're trying to set stronger standards that have a greater weight in planning decisions. So hopefully the local authority does have more, after this process, will have more power to refuse schemes on design grounds, essentially. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Heather got a hand up.
Yeah, good evening, folks. Can I make a plea, please? That, I mean, one of the considerations that I think perhaps needs to be sort of thought through within this design code is that crime is a material consideration. We've heard already around sort of electric charging points. We're still quite naive in terms of the crime that might be associated with electric charging points. I think we tend to learn by other forces, police forces experiences. And again, I think that that's a crime coming to Essex, and we're not quite sure what that might look like at the moment. But I think also, I mean, you know, from a policing perspective, we are very sort of sensitive to the landscape and the proposals that we've heard thus far, but it is around making sure that we do as much as we can in terms of the quality and sustainability, and making sure those places are safe, because that is one of the common denominators for people. They need to feel safe and secure. So whilst, you know, we totally appreciate the, you know, the considerations moving forward around materials, etc., it would be nice to see perhaps a principle within that design code that takes account of crime, and that therefore allows the flexibility moving forward within different phases of development to reconsider that and review, so that it's current, and we can then adapt perhaps advice moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Sorry,
definitely, and it is a key topic in the National Model Design Code, which is one of the documents that we're referring back to as developing the code. So it is something that we'll be looking to embed in the code through all of the principles and areas of the topic, really. And obviously we'll be coming back once we get into a bit more of that detail and setting out how that looks, and welcome comments on how we might move those elements forward. So there'll be a number of themes that will be running across all elements of coding, and safety and security is one of those. Obviously a big sort of focus on climate change as well. So that is something that we will be looking at, the connectivity of streets, overlooking of spaces, ensuring that we're looking at principles of good design, and where necessary or where possible, referring to guidance that exists elsewhere and directing people to that, not sort of replicating a good policy that exists elsewhere, but setting out the kind of process of how things must be reviewed as the process goes on, alongside sort of design reviews, but those sort of that engagement, and who developers need to engage with in order to have their schemes reviewed to ensure those principles are embedded within proposals.
Thank you. And if we can do anything to support, obviously, you know, please feel free to contact us.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we will be looking to consult with all, you know, crime and security consultees before, you know, as we're going through the process, so you've got a proper chance to review anything before you know, it goes out for SPD consultation. So that would be great if possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. So it doesn't look like there's any. Kevin French.
Sorry, could I ask one question?
Oh yeah.
I'm wondering whether you're going into, say, County High and Newport schools, and maybe engaging with the sixth form there or other young people, and getting their views on their town and what they think about what's going on. I mean, I just think, I mean, working as a teacher, I'm just often amazed by the thinking and the different ways of thinking of young people, and I wondered whether it's worth going in and maybe doing some workshops in County High and Newport and other schools in Uttlesford further south, and getting views on the, you know, it's a sort of sixth form, or giving them a project to do, or has that been, is that part of the, you know, the sort of thinking over between now and next May?
Really? Shall I answer that?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, and it very much is, and we are in touch with school, not just schools, but some local scout groups and sort of other young persons group. But would it be okay, I mean, if you you said you were a teacher, didn't you? And it would be sort of, if we can sort of take this, could I contact you outside this about
certainly,
sort of who, like, which schools might be most receptive to doing something, and where it might actually be of value to them, So obviously schools are really, really busy, and so we want to think about how it can.
Yeah. I think you've got my email address, so yeah, lovely, brilliant.
Being able to talk to you about it.
Yeah, brilliant.
I think Saffron Walden County High has a huge psychology department. There's more kids doing A-level psychology there than virtually anywhere. To ask them what it was that it felt about particular streets that made them feel safe would be a great project. So that takes it back to the section stuff and, you know, the reason why people choose to live in this area.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree. Kevin French, you wrote a question in the chat. Do you want to read it out?
I think it's what Kevin said at the top of the meeting.
It's something I said earlier on.
But it's captured it. So thanks for doing that, because it means we've captured it. I just wondered whether it's useful to actually look at some images of some of the sort of different types of parking or different types of streets.
Yeah, that's part two, isn't it? We're moving on to part two now.
Yeah, there seemed to be a lot of discussion there around really good sort of examples of, say, parking or streets that we're trying to imagine, but we do have some images that we can share.
Yeah, if we move on to that next section, then, and if people have questions, please continue to post those in the chat, and we can respond. So across a number of the different themes, we've put some example images, which aren't necessarily all even by our own team seen as positive images. So we welcome views on whether they would be some of the principles within the images. So what's the kind of focus of the image might be appropriate in Uttlesford, what you might like about the spaces, what you don't like about some of the images that have been shown. If we just start with the first one, which is streets, there's a number of images here, and I won't talk through all of those images, but some of these look at, they show examples of trees within streets, footpaths, segregated footpaths and cycleways separated from streets by landscapes areas, streets which are no through movement for cars, and examples of changes in material and in informal streets. And you can see some of the different boundary treatments to homes in there as well. So sort of welcome any views on what you think, sort of, you know, what you think of these images, or what you think might be appropriate in new development around Uttlesford, what you do and don't like about some of the streets maybe that have come forward in developments you've seen in the district. And so if anyone's got any sort of comments on these, or we can go through some more of the images and then come back to if any people have got specific topics that they'd like to discuss. So we've got a few, we've obviously touched on parking already, so there's a number of different examples here of different you know, different ways of showing parking, between on-street parking within sort of defined bays in streets, parking integrated within the homes, sort of creating more intimate streets, examples of sort of parking concealed in courtyards, and as I mentioned, sort of not all of them are definitely positives. We've got examples of vehicle charging within built form there as well. There's a few more parking, as parking is always a hot topic. Parking images on the next page of, again, examples of parking integrated within streets, so sort of shared parking areas, and car barns versus garages is something we heard about at some of the earlier consultations, where sort of garages not being really used for parking. So welcome sort of views on whether these are appropriate anywhere in Uttlesford, if they think so. Some might be more appropriate for the town centres, or some things might be considered not appropriate for Uttlesford at all. We've put a different range of images in here to get those views and spark conversation as well. So I don't know if anyone's got any initial thoughts on the sort of streets and parking sort of under that sort of movement topic within the National Design Guide, or if we happy to sort of whistle through some more of the images and things that we're considering in the code to get views. So if we go on to
Vic's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hard elevations in the buildings that you're showing examples of. I would think they would be more appropriate perhaps in the new settlements, as they come along, if they come along. Heights are a little bit of an issue. I can see that there are some ordinary houses which look more of a modern type, particularly the one on screen at the moment, bottom right. That's not following the Essex Design Guide type village thing that people prefer to see at the moment. But with the new constructions that we're going to have to put together, you're going to see a lot more bland stuff. There might not be all white render, it might be some colour in there, which is fine. But we've got to consider the modern approach to building, and some of those will be essential. That's just a general thought really on changing people's perception of what it's going to look like.
Thanks for that. And we've got a couple of other hands. Anne's got a physical hand, and then we've got Jane with a virtual hand.
I was just going to say that, of course, some of the very pretty parts of Saffron Walden were all built way before the invention of the car, and therefore all these designs that we see here on the screen, I've seen on all sorts of ways, and certainly some in Linton, for instance, and in Saffron Walden, where there were some new builds. And I think, you know, essentially, I don't know, again, this is a lay person speaking, but I think it depends which design problem you're solving in which particular place, because I think they could all work. You know, whether you've got a car barn, whether you've got a little sort of car port sort of underneath, or sort of that sort of archway. I've seen I've seen virtually all of these working in different ways locally, and really sensitively done. So I think it's sort of I think it's sort of solving the specific problem in a specific location, and how you deal with that most sort of sensitively and ecologically, that seems to be would seem to me the most sort of appropriate way forward. Because I think yeah, sorry, I know that sounds good, but I don't know whether that's useful, but I think they're all good.
I think that's that is a good point, and obviously one of the the debates that we want to have around whether or not it's appropriate to code these things differently across different areas, whether or not we should be doing that, or actually whether what we should be setting out is principles of, okay, if you're doing this type of parking, it whether it's about the landscaping or the overlooking of, and we've mentioned safety of those spaces as the priority, rather than saying, okay, well, parking courts are only appropriate in, should be more advisable in these areas. So I think is a very good point. Thank you, Anne. If we go to Jane. So Jane, you're on mute.
Yeah. The only thing, I live on a new estate. The estate's was built 3 years ago, and there's some very good points about it and some bad ones. And looking at the pictures, I think one of the most important things, as far as my experience is concerned, is that safety for pedestrians is really important. And some of them have got footpaths and some of them haven't, and that's reflected in my estate as well. And I can see why they haven't got footpaths, because obviously the developer is trying to pack in as many properties as they can, and they've really given priority to the drivers. So they've got most properties have got 2 car parking spaces on the drive, they're tandem drives, which isn't ideal. But people are very, I don't know, they're very used to their own kind of behaviours, and they like to have their car right beside them in a drive. And I'm not sure about this kind of central parking, whether that would actually work or whether it would be very popular. But the main thing for me is the road safety thing, and the greenery as well. It just makes so much difference where there is, the landscaping is good and there are lots of trees. That's it, really.
Great, thank you, Jane. If we just move on maybe to perhaps to the next
Was it, I think David
Next.
had his hand up. Sorry, Sarah.
Oh, sorry, I can't see everyone.
Oh, apologies. Sorry. Yeah, David.
It looks like there are photographs of one of your field trips to Trumpeton Meadows. Am I seeing that right?
So, some of them are. There are some other examples from elsewhere, and later in the presentation we have a few local examples. Some of them is getting images that we've got copyright from.
So the picture on the bottom left, which was, that was a design coded scheme.
Yeah, that is Trumpington Meadows. The one on the bottom left.
I was employed as a specialist advisor to Cambridge when that scheme came through. I know all the detail of it. Essentially, the design code said that about half the parking should be on the street. You can see it there in those parallel bays. What did people think about that? Because it's quite an interesting scheme. But how did people respond to that amongst the panel that went?
It's quite. It's partly around the. This wasn't a study tour with. Some of these images are taken from our sort of library of images. I think on the study tour, Jack, you went to some of the tours you went on.
You went on the Trumpington one, Sarah. Yeah.
So more recently, there's been a couple of other schemes, and the schemes that we visited locally on the bus tour, which I was at the exhibition, so not on the bus tour, were local developments. So some of these are taken from our image library in the practice. So I don't think.
So no one could comment to say we liked it or we didn't like it, because it's an interesting model. I just wondered how it went down.
True. I mean, yeah, Trumpington, got good reviews from the people that I was with. I mean, in terms of the specific comments on the on-street parking, off the top of my head, I can't remember any. But yeah, I mean, it was extremely beneficial that tour, and councillors did like what they see. The good elements anyway from memory.
Yeah, and I mean, as a design code, obviously it's a site specific design code, but it's not overly heavy. It sets those kind of key principles and framework, and it's come forward into a what's mostly seen as a good development.
Jane is saying she doesn't like on-street parking. Can we find out why?
I think the main reason is that people can fight over spaces. I think that's a very common problem, because I don't know whether they're allocated spaces or it's just a free-for-all. Is it just a free-for-all?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've then got the problem with charging points as well if you are going to have an electric car. I don't think. It's not always easy to park in them if there's just a small space. I don't think it's as safe to have cars actually on the road and have to overtake them. And I think it just looks ugly. I just don't like it. I mean, in my estate, funnily enough, although everybody's got parking spaces, it's amazing how many people, or a drive, it's amazing how many people park bang outside their front door because of the convenience. Which is daft really, but some people do get so possessive over their own little space. I don't know that it actually works very well in practice.
Yeah, so I wonder. It's a bit of feedback there. In terms of the David mentioned that, say, a house might have, say, the requirement is that a house has 2 parking spaces. One of those is provided on plot, and the other, and so there's 10 houses, they each have 1 on plot, and then the other 10 would make up the policy are provided on streets, because not in terms of maybe not everyone having a car, or in future not everyone having a car, so some of those spaces being, sometimes they might be used by visitors or similar. I wonder if that's a sort of how you feel about that approach of these sort of, people would have that space on driveway, but then you'd have a sort of shared parking solution as well.
I think that's preferable to not having any of your own. I mean, I'm very anti-car, so I'd like to get rid of all cars, but realistically, that's just not going to happen. And people are so, I mean, there are lots of young people in my estate, and they're just so possessive over their cars, and want the convenience of unloading shopping and this sort of thing. and the thought of them having to walk a few yards to get to their front door, I just don't think would go down very well. Or perhaps, perhaps people will have to in the future when we run out of space. But at the moment, I just don't know that it works. I mean, I used to live in a very narrow road in Saffron Walden, Hollyhock Road. I don't know whether anybody knows of it. And there was one particular resident who always insisted on having his car parked bang outside his house. And if the space wasn't there, he would just park right opposite, so it was double parking until the other person was forced to move their car. And on one occasion, he actually wrapped the car, somebody who parked in front of his house, he wrapped it up in cling film.
That was at the bottom end of Hollyhock Road, wasn't it, on the Radwinch Road end? I remember seeing that.
Oh, do you? Yeah, no, it's crazy. But there you go, that's just the mindset of some people, isn't it?
Yeah, no, so Kevin, you've had your hand up very.
Yeah, Kevin, you've just been
very
off my screen.
patiently.
Apologies.
I like the fact that road in Trumpington has got design for off-street parking. There is plenty of room for it. People will park outside their houses. You can't, unfortunately, they always will. And if the road is designed for it and there's space for it, I think that's better than people parking half on the pavement and blocking pedestrians, and that's when it does get dangerous.
That's a great point. Thank you.
And again, that's back to the section. That's the width of the carriageway. You only park on the pavement if you haven't got a wide enough carriageway.
Yeah, I like the sections. We've got them in our neighbourhood plan design code, and it's very clear where pedestrians are safe. There's enough room for traffic, and there's enough room for parked cars.
Just conscious of time, if we maybe want to show some of the just I'll sort of go through some of the other kind of topics that we can discuss, and people can jump in with maybe views on things that they'd like to have a conversation around. So we've got a few images around, if we go into the next slide, sort of uses at ground floor, uses in sort of new spaces and new communities, community facilities. So I think it's we're going very quickly through the images. So opening up a discussion around uses, what's maybe felt to be lacking in some of the areas, what maybe you've seen developments coming forward in the area that feel are too far from walkability to services, for example, open spaces, and there's a few examples in here of some different types of open spaces, including one of my favorite examples that says keep off the grass, no play activities allowed. So understanding what sort of open spaces people would like to see in their local area and how they feel these should be integrated into the design of developments, the types of uses in open spaces in the surrounding area as well, from community growing and how this might be integrated. You mentioned the rosemary beds at the Thaxted scheme, so it's a potential something that should be encouraged through the design code. So, different spaces for young adults, and as we've mentioned, having workshops with them, and natural spaces and plants and species as well. So I think if we can just flick through the slides a bit more slowly, that'd be really helpful. So as I mentioned, the uses in the community growing, and we have some images of different types of open space, including open space and landscape, if you just go to the next slide, within employment areas as well, and the appropriateness of those spaces for people that work in the areas, formal parks versus natural play opportunities, and these might be appropriate in different areas of the district, integrating play alongside streets, safely separated from carriageways, sort of creating a more sort of friendly movements between places for young people and children. And if we just flick on to maybe want to discuss the sort of resources section, we've mentioned this, maybe something that gets covered district-wide, about integration of refuse collection and things as well. What sort of solutions are appropriate, what the challenges of the district are at the moment. So we've got some solar panels on there, it's something people might have views on. As well, we've got types of homes, which is the next slide, and we show some more slightly more urban examples here about appropriateness of increased density and heights within terrace buildings, homes with shared communal gardens, potentially with smaller private gardens, sort of small scale apartments that have balconies. We have a few examples of water and drainage on the next slide, different solutions to providing accommodating sustainable drainage within streets versus sort of natural spaces that form sort of features within the landscape. And there's examples of alternative sort of providing amenity space at different levels as well. And we also have some images on building lines and boundaries, which is the last one. Obviously, there are some specific characters within some of the areas of the district of sort of boundary treatments that we could welcome views on. And
could you just explain the choice of that picture, top right?
That's an example of a bad.
As I said, well, maybe people don't think it's bad, Jack. It's open to views.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Not all of the examples we're expecting people to like or think is good examples, and that's one that shows a timber fence adjacent to public realm and the sustainable drainage, so reviews on whether, and this is something that you see in developments in the district as well, and something that we'd hope the views are that that's not an appropriate solution, but
rightly say, Sarah, maybe not, but yeah.
But maybe
say.
but something that is seen across the district, back gardens onto the public realm with a timber fence, so welcome views on the inclusion of that image. But yes, and they're not all necessarily suggestions of things we think should be included. Some of the things that maybe we would like to code against, rather than what should you do, but also what must you not do. So there'll be some elements of that in there as well. Before we sort of open up for discussion again, sorry, just conscious of time, maybe if we just move on to the next step slide, so we can talk about what are the next steps. So obviously there'll be further opportunity to feedback from this session, because it's been a bit shorter, a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but we'll be looking at preparing the code, seeking views on the material that we've shared. We'll also be being reviewed by design review panels, and sort of having wider debate around what's included in the code, engaging with Essex design guide as well, and other sort of officers, and we're sharing the design code in spring. And just as a sort of admin point, I don't know if Jack, if you want to pick up on Saturday's event, but we'll also be having a survey that will be live from next Monday, which will give opportunity to feed back views and further comments on some of the topics that we've discussed today.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, as you said, Sarah, it's coming up to 8 p.m. now. So and Jessica shared in the chats the website where we'll share, because we obviously had to rattle through those slides quite quickly. So yeah, the slides will be on the website, and any further comments, yeah, please let us know. I think because it's 8 p.m. now, I'll say that I understand people might need to drop off, but if anybody would like to hang around and have a discussion, I'm happy to. But if anybody needs to drop off, then absolutely fine. Consultants included in that as well, because it is 8 p.m. So yeah, any questions? Anyone who'd like to hang around for a chat?
Yes, I would.
Vic, sorry, yeah, I got your hand up.
Yeah, willing to do that.
Great.
There's some great points come up tonight, and some lovely ideas. When we looked at that parking, David said the width of the carriageway was important, so you can get the on-street parking away from the traffic flow and get pedestrians safe. It all comes down to density of the development. I think we need to set some criteria for development. Today at planning, there was a development putting in something like 44 dwellings per hectare. You're not going to get those sorts of roads at that density with the price of land in Uttlesford. So we need to bring the densities down so that we can afford to get the circulation spaces and the green spaces in where we need them.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
You can.
I think something like about 50% of all the development built between 1830 and about 1914 is at 45 homes to the hectare, and it's all using a 6 metre wide carriageway, but typically with 3-storey houses. So the big difference is you get the money back by adding a level, and then that pays for other things.
And at planning today, they were saying we don't want 3-bedroom, 3-storey housing. So, you know, there's a bit of a culture shock coming for some people. They've got to realise that some of these things don't go together well without the compromise. They've got to give up something.
Yeah, and you know, those 3-storey houses, as the consultants from London will tell us, are just about the most expensive thing you can buy. So it's not that much of a compromise.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as David's touched on, there's a number of different ways of providing those densities, and I think it's, you know, down to, as we touched on in the car parking, the quality of the design that goes into those. That particular phase of Trumpington that we looked at with the on-street parking is lower density, but there are other phases of that same development that go up to sort of 60 plus dwellings per hectare and provide the on-street parking. Obviously there's 3-storey and some apartments in there as well, but provide the same street widths which are set out by that same design code that David mentioned, and that provide those higher densities whilst providing the same sort of street conditions. So that's down to obviously the quality of the design of how those are brought forward, which is often where the challenge comes, the sort of delivery of it, and how the sort of those densities are planned in.
Are there any other questions?
I have a question for the people here, if that's okay, which I've just put into the chat, which is in terms of following up with sort of further discussion, what would you find useful? Do you find it useful or at least more convenient to have an online session, particularly at this time of year and over winter, or would you be prepared to travel to somewhere in Uttlesford for an online event, or would you prefer everything to be just like on the website or put up on notice boards? Yeah.
It's a question of numbers, isn't it? You know, with these virtuals, we can get the numbers. Mind you, tonight has been fairly low. The forums that I followed earlier in the year were low, but everybody's got an opinion. And when the local plan consultation comes out, they'll all be on it. And so I think publication getting more people to Zoom in will help. But I think it is an impossible task really to get every possible opinion or enough opinion in to really be sure that you're going to get an easier message later on.
We have done, and we will continue to do, a few sort of pop-up stalls in local markets and places where people already are, rather than asking people necessarily to come to sessions. But as the people here are clearly interested, people would like to make sure that you're sort of kept in the conversation. So thank you. And Jane likes online meetings. Excellent.
Great. Okay, so if there's no more questions, then we're 3 minutes over, which I think is a good going. So I suppose, yeah, thank you very much indeed, everyone, for coming along. Yeah, I mean, the slides will be on the website. The survey will be coming out on the website, and any further, we've captured all the thoughts from tonight. Obviously, and anything else, please let us know, and we'll be in touch with the next stages.
Great.
But there's nothing on Saturday, yeah?
No, we've had basically the reason I asked that question was because there was very little take up for coming to something in Great Dunmow on Saturday. So hence we're going to put our energies into reaching people in other ways at the moment, and then this evening's session as well. But yes, so if anyone was thinking of coming to Great Dunmow, you won't be missing anything if you're already here, because it was the same information. But if you do know anybody that was thinking of coming and they haven't got the message that it's been cancelled, then we've had to cancel it. But yeah, as far as I understand it, it wasn't strange. It wasn't something people wanted to do on a Saturday at the end of November coming up to Christmas. So,
The day after
very
England
much
Play.
appreciate. Sorry, David.
The day after England play USA.
Yeah, but it was going to coincide with the Great Dunmow Christmas light switch on, so we're kind of a bit gutted that we're going to miss that because we were looking forward to that. But anyway.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much indeed, everyone, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Cheers.
very much.
Bye all.
Bye.
Have a good evening. Bye.
Thanks.